This is getting a little bit better, so hopefully this is getting better to listen. Start the chapter with our bee quote. On leaving the old nest, the swarm normally flies only a few meters and settles. Scout bees look for a suitable place to start the new colony. Eventually, one location wins favor, and the whole swarm takes to the air. Bees of the world. So think about that. The quote at the beginning of the chapter kind of talks a little bit about relocating and moving and settling. So what could that mean for our story? How could that relate to this chapter? All right, here we go. Remember when chapter 1 left off? Rosalind and Lily had just gotten in trouble at the gas station. Rosalind had poured her chew all over the men's feet at the gas station, and that resulted in a bit of a scuffle, and Rosalind being held down, and then Rosalind and Lily both being put in the back of a police car. And remember, the policeman tells Lily that he will call her father, and her father will deal with her. So she's not being arrested, but her father is going to be notified of what happened, which if you're Lily, at this point, I'm not sure if I'd be more afraid of the policeman or of T-Ray. All right, so here we go, chapter 2. The policeman driving us to jail was Mr. Avery Gaston, but the men at the Esso station called him Shoe. A puzzling nickname, since there was nothing remarkable about his shoes, or even his feet so far as I could see. The only thing about him was the smallness of his ears. The ears of a child, ears like little dried apricots. I fixed my eyes on them from the back seat and wondered why he wasn't called Ears. What great imagery about ears, huh? The 3 men followed us in a green pickup with a gun rack inside. They drove close to our bumper and blew the horn every few seconds. I jumped each time, and Rosalind gave my leg a pat. In front of the Western Auto, the men started a game of pulling alongside us and yelling things out the window. Mostly things we couldn't make out because our windows were rolled up. People in the back of police cars were not given the benefit of door handles or window cranks, I noticed. So we were blessed to be chauffeured to jail in smothering heat, watching the men mouth things we were glad not to know. Rosalind looked straight ahead and acted as if the men were insignificant houseflies buzzing at our screen door. I was the only one who could feel the way her thighs trembled, the whole back seat like a vibrating bed. Mr. Gaston, I said, those men aren't coming with us, are they? His smile appeared in the rearview mirror. I can't say what men riled up like that will do. Riled, have you heard that word before? Might be a good vocab word. Before Main Street, they tired of the amusement and sped off. I breathed easier. But when we pulled into the empty lot behind the police station, they were waiting on the back steps. The dealer tapped a flashlight against the palm of his hand. The other 2 held our church fans, waving them back and forth. When we got out of the car, Mr. Gaston put handcuffs on Rosalind, fastening her arms behind her back. I walked so close to her I felt heat vapor trailing off her skin. She stopped 10 yards short of the men and refused to budge. Now look here, don't make me get out my gun, Mr. Gaston said. Usually, the only time the police in Sylvan got to use their guns was when they got called out to shoot rattlesnakes in people's yards. Come on, Rosalind, I said. What can they do to you with a policeman right here? That was when the dealer lifted the flashlight over his head, then down, smashing it into Rosalind's forehead. She dropped to her knees. I don't remember screaming, but the next thing I know, Mr. Gaston had his hand clamped over my mouth. Hush, he said. So the guy comes and whacks Rosalind on the head with a flashlight. And what does the policeman do? Puts his hand on Lily's mouth to try to quiet her. Doesn't try to apprehend the guy who hit Rosalind, nothing. So clearly we have a bit of a, maybe now what we would consider a little bit of backwards type of society, right? Normally, if somebody is handcuffed, they're defenseless, and somebody hits them, that person will get in trouble. But that doesn't appear to be happening, at least not yet. Maybe now you feel like apologizing, the dealer said. Rosalind tried to get to her feet, but without her hands, it was hopeless. It took me and Mr. Gaston both to pull her back up. Your black ass is going to apologize one way or another, the dealer said, and he stepped toward Rosalind. Hold on now, Franklin, said Mr. Gaston, moving us toward the door. Now's not the time. I'm not resting till she apologizes. That's the last thing I heard him yell before we got inside, where I had an overpowering impulse to kneel down and kiss the jailhouse floor. The only image I had for jails was from westerns at the movies, and this one was nothing like that. For one thing, it was painted pink and had flower print curtains in the window. It turned out we'd come in through the jailer's living quarters. His wife stepped in from the kitchen, greasing a muffin tin. Got you 2 more mouths to feed, Mr. Gaston said, and she went back to work without a smile of sympathy. He led us around the front where there were 2 rows of jail cells, all of them empty. Mr. Gaston removed Rosalind's handcuffs and handed her a towel from the bathroom. She pressed it against her head while he filled out papers at a desk, followed by a period of poking around for keys in a file drawer. The jail cells smelled with the breath of drunk people. He put us in the first cell on the first row, where somebody had scratched the words shit thrown across a bench attached to one wall. Nothing seemed quite real. We're in jail, I thought. We're in jail. When Rosalind pulled back the towel, I saw an inch-long gash across a puffy place high over her eyebrow. Is it hurting bad? I asked. Some, she said. She circled the cell 2 or 3 times before sinking down onto the bench. T-Ray'll get us out, I said. Uh-huh. She didn't speak another word till Mr. Gaston opened the cell door about a half hour later. Come on, he said. Rosalind looked hopeful for a moment. She actually started to lift herself up. He shook his head. You ain't going anywhere. Just the girl. At the door, I held on to a cell bar like it was the long bone in Rosalind's arm. I'll be back, all right? All right, Rosalind? You go on. I'll manage. The caved-in look of her face nearly did me in. The speedometer needle on T-Ray's truck wiggled so badly I couldn't make out whether it pointed to 70 or 80. Leaning into the steering wheel, he jammed his foot onto the accelerator, let off, then jammed it again. The poor truck was rattling to the point I expected the hood to fly off and decapitate a couple of pine trees. I imagined that T-Ray was rushing home so he could start right away constructing pyramids of grits all through the house, a torture chamber of food staples, where I would go from one pile to the next, kneeling for hours on end with nothing but bathroom breaks. I didn't care. I couldn't think of anything but Rosalind back there in jail. I squinted at him sideways. What about Rosalind? You have to get her out. You're lucky I got you out, he yelled. But she can't stay there. She dumped snuff juice on 3 white men. What the hell was she thinking? And I'm Franklin Posey, for Christ's sake? She couldn't pick somebody normal? He's the meanest hater in Sylvan. He'd just as soon kill her as look at her. But not really, I said. You don't mean he would really kill her? What I mean is I wouldn't be surprised if he flat out killed her. My arms felt weak in their sockets. Franklin Posey was the man with the flashlight, and he was going to kill Rosalind. But then, hadn't I known this inside even before T-Ray had ever said it? He followed me up the stairs. I moved with deliberate slowness, anger suddenly building in me. How could he just leave Rosalind in jail like that? Deliberate, another good vocab word. As I stepped inside my room, he stopped at the doorway. I have to go settle the payroll for the pickers, he said. Don't you leave this room, you understand me? You sit here and think about me coming back and dealing with you. Think about it real hard. You don't scare me, I said, mostly under my breath. He'd already turned to leave, but now he whirled back. What did you say? You don't scare me, I repeated, louder this time. A brazen feeling had broken loose in me, a daring something that had been locked up in my chest. Brazen, another good word. He stepped toward me, raising the back of his hand like he might bring it down across my face. You better watch your mouth. Go ahead, try and hit me, I yelled. When he swung, I turned my face. It was a clean miss. I ran for the bed, scrambled onto the middle of it, breathing hard. My mother will never let you touch me again, I shouted. Your mother? His face was bright red. You think that damn woman gave a shit about you? My mother loved me, I cried. He threw back his head and let out a forced, bitter laugh. It's not funny, I said. He lunged toward the bed then, pressing his fist into the mattress, bringing his face so close I could see the tiny holes where his whiskers grew. I slid backward toward the pillow, shoving my back onto the headboard. Not funny, he yelled. Not funny? Why, it's the funniest damn thing I'd ever heard. You thinking your mother's your guardian angel. He laughed again. That woman couldn't have cared less about you. That's not true, I said. It's not. And how would you know? He said, still leaning toward me. A leftover smile pulled the corners of his mouth. I hate you, I screamed. That stopped his smiling instantly. He stiffened. Why, you little bitch, he said. The color faded from his lips. Suddenly, I felt ice cold, as if something dangerous had slipped into the room. I looked toward the window and felt a tremor slide along my spine. You listen to me, he said, his voice deadly calm. The truth is, your sorry mother ran off and left you. The day she died, she'd come back to get her things. That's all. You can hate me all you want, but she's the one who left you. The room turned absolutely silent. He brushed at something on his shirt front, then walked to the door. After he left, I didn't move except to trace the bars of light on the bed with my finger. The sound of his boots banging down the stairs drifted away, and I took the pillows from underneath the bedspread and placed them around me like I was making an inner tube that might keep me afloat. I could understand her leaving him, but me? This would sink me forever. The bee jar sat on the bedside table, empty now. Sometime since this morning, the bees had finally gotten around to flying off. I reached over and took the jar in my hands, and out came the tears I'd been holding on to. It seemed like for years. Your sorry mother ran off and left you. The day she died, she'd come back to get her things, that's all. God and Jesus, make him take it back. The memory settled over me. The suitcase on the floor, the way they'd fought, my shoulders began to shake in a strange, controllable way. I held the jar pressed between my breasts, hoping it would steady me, but I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop crying, and it frightened me, as though I'd been struck by a car I hadn't seen coming and was lying on the side of the road, trying to understand what had happened. I sat at the edge of the bed, replaying his words over and over. Each time there was a wrench in what felt like my heart. I don't know how long I sat there, feeling broken to pieces. I walked to the window and gazed out at the peach trees stretching halfway to North Carolina, the way they held up their leafy arms in gestures of pure and beseeching. The rest was sky and air and lonely space. I looked down at the bee jar still clutched in my hand and saw a teaspoon of teardrops floating in the bottom. I unfastened the window screen and poured it out. The wind lifted it on her skirt tails and shook it over the blistered grass. How could she have left me? I stood there several minutes, looking out in the world, trying to understand. Little birds were singing, so perfect. That's when it came to me. What if my mother leaving wasn't true? What if T-Ray had made it up to punish me? I felt almost dizzy with relief. That was it. That had to be it. I mean, my father was Thomas Edison when it came to inventing punishments. Once after I'd backtalked him, he told me my rabbit, Mademoiselle, had died. And I'd cried all night before I discovered her the next morning, healthy as anything in her pen. He had to be making this up, too. Some things were not possible in this world. Children did not have two parents who refused to love them. One, maybe, but for pity's sake, not two. It had to be like he'd said before. She was cleaning out the closet the day of the accident. People cleaned out closets all the time. I took a breath to steady myself. And we will stop right there for today. We'll continue tomorrow.